Sanhedrin, which is the Jewish Senate, which unfortunately hasn't met for the last 2,000 years or so, and has no intention of meeting again. And so it's not going to meet. So what's the hope is among these more serious Jewish scholars is that what's it called? What's the end of the world called? No, whatever. The world that will change within 300 years. A Messiah will come. Everybody will be saved. Even the calendar. That's the hope. We'll never know. I mean, at least none of us. But come back in 300 years. Yes.
Good afternoon again. My name is Sam. I'm 11th grade, and my question was, well, before I get to my question, all right, you were very determined when you were young and also in your middle age. Sorry.
Yeah.
How were you able to stay motivated to achieve all your accomplishments?
Well, I say, I mean, it's been a long time. Yeah, that's true. Well, first of all, it's fun. Secondly, I had a lot of support from my family. For example, when I was called up in the middle of the night, 6 in the morning for me is the middle of the night, and WEEI told me I won the Nobel Prize, the phone would continually ring. I put it down and ring again. I put it down and ring again. I knew they were going to come to the door with television cameras, so my wife was dressing me as I was on the phone. So I had that kind of support throughout my life. I don't mean she doesn't dress me every day. Just on a special occasion.
Hello, Daniel again. If you had to choose another type of science besides physics, what would it be?
If I had to do another, I could perfectly well imagine doing astrophysics and cosmology, for example. And I've often thought that it would be fun to do cognitive science or neurophysiology or something to do with one of the greatest problems puzzling people, which is what is consciousness? How do we think? So that's a direction I think I could have gone had I gone in another direction. Yeah.
Japanese, you're in the tunnel or some room. How far down were you?
Oh, it wasn't actually down. It was horizontal. There's a huge mountain called Kamioka. Kamioka is also a town. And the train goes under the mountain, and then you're a mile underground where they have a laboratory, so you have no cosmic rays. Very few cosmic rays can make it through 1 kilometer of rock to get into the laboratory. And that laboratory was originally built to look for universal radioactivity, looking for the radioactive decay of all matter, something that a theory of mine predicted in 1972. And so this laboratory was built for the purpose of detecting this phenomenon, which they failed to detect because it doesn't happen, apparently. But the laboratory turned out to be very important for other purposes, and it discovered the first evidence for neutrino mass, neutrino oscillations. It helped to solve what was called the solar neutrino problem. It did many important things. So at one point in the 90s, I was invited, I think it was 1998, which is a very important year because that laboratory made a world-shaking announcement that neutrinos have mass, had been proven to have mass, and they invited me there to give a talk to a bunch of students from Kamioka that had been brought in on a train that goes into the bottom of the mine. They have a lecture room there and slides and all kinds of funny things. They believe in outreach very strongly, as do American laboratories. Brookhaven National Laboratory, name one, there's a very strong outreach program to get people to see the relativistic heavy ion collider in operation. Better hurry up because it's going to be closed down soon. So it was an outreach issue. And the same was true. There was an organization kind of like what Dr. Shapiro is doing in America, in Italy, in Milan, and they would invite Nobel Prize winners, but because they're paying my way and my wife's way, business class, all the way to Italy, I would talk not at one school, but I would talk at a middle school, at a high school, at a college, to the Chamber of Commerce, to other venues of people to tell people about the endeavor of high-energy physics and cosmology. So that was an interesting thing, which lasted only for a few years because the people who did it, who broke up, it was a couple, and they lost their finances, and it lasted 5 years or so. It was good while it lasted. I hope that Dr. Shapiro's program will have an indefinite lifetime.
Thank you. Looks like.
Did you get to meet Niels Bohr in Europe?
Yes, I got to meet Niels Bohr. Not only did I get to meet him, but I would, for the period I was there, which was over a year, I would have lunch with him most days with the other postdoctoral fellows who were there. He was very friendly. He wasn't doing much physics at the time. He was more inclined to work for peace and nuclear disarmament and things of that sort at that time. But he would come to lectures regularly. He would always sit on the front row, right-hand side seat with his cigar and his, not a cigar, his pipe and his large matches, and he would be perpetually trying to light his pipe, never succeeding quite. And he would be, in those days you smoked even during lectures. It was strange, different time. But yes, and there was one time when a Dutch guy, I'll tell a dirty joke if I may, a Dutch guy came, and he was very proud that he could sort of speak some Danish, because the little words in Dutch are not so different from the little words in Danish. And so he put together a sentence saying that he said, I have bicycled my way all the way from Amsterdam to Copenhagen. And the problem was with the word he used for to go by bicycle, Sinclair, which perfectly nice word in Dutch, but it has an entirely different meaning, very different meaning, very bad meaning. It indicates that he was quite a lewd character to have done that all the way from Amsterdam to Copenhagen. And Bohr said, that is very interesting. So you have to be very dangerous, very careful using a foreign language if you're not fluent in it, because it's very easy to say the wrong thing. That reminds me of one last story with Sidney Coleman, my beloved first student, more or less. And we were traveling together in Italy, and he was he got an infection of the crabs, the parasitic insects down there. He had to go to a doctor, but he didn't know any Italian, and he was very bad at languages. And he had a little dictionary, and he says that in Italian he pieced together little tiny insects are eating my testicles. The doctor understood and gave him the right message. But it didn't always work, because in Denmark, when he was in Denmark, he wanted to get oh no, this is not the same person, a different person. This is my brother-in-law, who was also bad at languages, Benny. We were both in Copenhagen at the same time studying with Niels Bohr, and I had a little used bicycle that they had given to me that someone else had left there that I was using to get back and forth from my home. And he wanted to get a used bicycle too, and there were no more leftover used bicycles, so he was looking for a used bicycle store. Now, I got his little book, he looked up used bicycle, goes into a new bicycle store, and he says these words from the book, and the guy doesn't understand them, so he says the same things, a little varied, a little louder. Still, the Danish guy doesn't understand. And finally, the Danish guy hit his head and says, I know, come. So he took Danny by the arm, walked him to the door of the store, to a bus stop. A bus came, he pushed him on the bus. And Danny was on the bus, he got off at the next stop, he didn't know. Eventually he got a used bicycle, but I don't know how. So you've got to be careful with talking in other tongues.
We have a question here.
Now,
Do you speak any foreign languages?
sorry?
Do you speak any foreign languages?
Do I speak any other languages than English? I'm afraid not. I studied Danish. I studied Russian. I can say how do you do in those languages. I studied Italian and I studied French. The French I studied in junior high school. In high school, I learned about the French cheeses, and I learned about French sayings, and I learned about the great cities of France. But my knowledge of French was pathetic. But since I've spent some time in France, and I was in fact an associated professor at the University of Marseille, I can speak bad French. However, when I tried to speak French to students at a class, they requested that they were very pleased that I could speak French, but they requested that I speak English. So the answer is no. But I tried. I tried to play the piano. No good at that. I tried to play the flute. I'm no good at that. So what can I do? Yes, right here.
My name is John. When you were going for your PhD, you said that you didn't think that the work you've done was really significant, but you submitted anyways. So what led you to go back to it?
Well, there was again, the problem split up like the hydrogen atom into an algebraic problem and an analytic problem. And the analytic problem was how could these particles that mediate the weak force, how did they get mass? How did they acquire mass? And the algebraic problem was how could it be that the intermediaries of the weak force don't respect space reflection symmetry, whereas the electromagnetic interaction does respect parity, space reflection symmetry. And that problem I could not solve until I went to Copenhagen and realized that there had to be a richer theory. It wasn't enough to have a W plus, W minus, and photon. You had to have an additional particle, which meant the group structure had to be different from the rotation group. Instead of what's called SU2, it had to be SU2 plus U1. It had to be a larger mathematical structure. And then this parity situation was completely explicable, okay? But we still, that's nice, but we still didn't know how W and Z, how these particles get their mass. And we also didn't know how this theory could be extended to deal with neutrons and protons. It only worked for electrons and neutrinos and particles like that. And even when my friend Steve, when he introduced the so-called Higgs mechanism into the theory, which explained through a mechanism of spontaneous symmetry breaking how these particles could get their mass, he wrote a paper which he called a theory of leptons. And that is to say, it described the weak and electromagnetic forces of electrons and neutrinos and their kin, not neutrons and protons. He had no way of extending the theory to neutrons and the protons. And the reason he could not do that has a lot to do with quarks. The quarks were already there. This was 1967. but it couldn't be done until you introduced the fourth quark, the charmed quark. So the charmed quark turned out to be the key to extend his theory of leptons to all particles. So he didn't take his paper seriously. Essentially, nobody referred to my paper or his paper until evidence was found for these neutral currents. 1972. Then there was an explosion of citations to the work that he and I had done. Yeah.
What made you name it the charm quark?
It's interesting. That paper where, on the basis of aesthetic arguments, we introduced the charmed quark, there's somebody else was involved in that paper, was a good friend of mine named James Bjorkheim. And he insists that I was the guy who chose the name charmed quark. In fact, he was very reluctant to co-author this paper with me, and because he thought the idea was totally crazy, and he didn't want this paper to be on his CV. So it is, Mr. Bjorkheim is of Norwegian extraction, so that he put a slash through the O in his name, which is the way Norwegians would spell it, for the first and only time in his career, so that it would not appear in citation index or in any way as his paper. He also gave, instead of calling himself James Bjorkheim, he called himself B.J. Bjorkheim, which was his nickname, except with the slash through the O. Thereby guaranteeing that if you look up James Bjorkheim, you don't find that paper in the list of papers that he's written. So he was not sympathetic with the idea at all. As a favor, he co-signed it with me. Now, that doesn't answer the question, why did I call it charm? Maybe it has to do with extrasensory perception, that I could see the future. Because, to be honest, I don't know why, in 1964, I called it the charmed quark. 6 years later, when I wrote this other paper with the Italian guy and the Greek guy, Iliopoulos and Maiani, we realized that this extra quarks would serve a purpose, that there was a good reason why it had to exist, and it suppressed the appearance of certain unobserved processes. There were certain things that could have happened, called strangest changing neutral currents, and the charmed quark suppresses them, it does away with them, it cancels them away, and it thereby justified its name, because a charm is a device like an amulet that you wear to avert evil. In this case, the evil was experimental phenomena, that experiments that do not see strangeness changing neutral currents. It got rid of it, expunged, what do you call it when you remove a ghost from someone? It did that to strangeness changing neutral currents. It's an amulet, and it worked very well. In fact, it worked so well that I was very proud last summer to go to Europe, where John and Luciano and I shared a modest little prize from the European Physical Society. The annual prize for high energy physics was given to us for work we had done fully 40 years earlier. It was sort of amusing. I'll end that question with a remark about John and Luciano. Luciano Maiani, yes, it sounds like he's Italian, and he's sort of Italian, but he isn't really, because he was born in San Marino, and so he is technically a citizen of San Marino, which is important only for the reason that in the times that he was a student, there was universal military service in Italy, but not in San Marino, so he didn't have to be in the army because he was a citizen of San Marino. Now, John Iliopoulos sounds as Greek as you could be, except he is and has been for many years a resident of France, and today he's a has a double nationality of French and Greek, which turned out to be very important to him, because when I hired him at Harvard to be a postdoc, and he stayed as postdoc and assistant professor for some years, the first 2 years, he had the right to exclude his salary from American income tax, offering to pay it in France, because there was a treaty, there still is, between France and the United States, that if you're a scholar and you come to America, a French scholar, you can either pay French taxes or American taxes as you please. He didn't pay the French taxes because French law does not include money that you make outside of France. So he was legally free of paying any taxes at all while he was in America for 2 years. But then 2 years had passed and he was still at Harvard with me. So now he declared himself to be Greek, and we have a treaty with Greece that enables you to spend 2 years to pay either Greek tax or United States tax. And he, of course, offered to pay Greek tax, which he didn't have to pay because if you're Greek, and you live outside of Greece, you don't have to pay Greek tax. So he got 4 years without paying any income tax, whatever, in a perfectly legal fashion. He was a brilliant postdoc. So,
if you were to give any work for any students going for their PhD,
sorry?
if you were to give any work, like a work for any students going for their PhD,
Have they got awards? I have about not so many, 20 students that have done their PhDs with me. The most famous of them is a guy who used to be Chinese, and he became American, and now he's Chinese again. He's Andy Yao. Andy Yao took a PhD with me, and then he traveled with me to France while I was a visiting professor in Marseille. So I knew him quite well. But after he left Harvard, he decided that he was more interested in computer science than in particle physics. So he took a second PhD, 3 more years, at Princeton in computer science. And he became an extremely famous professor of computer science, mathematics, basically. And he's very well known as a scientist, and he had a professorship, I believe, in Princeton, but recently he has gone back to China, where he's a professor at a major university in Hong Kong today. Very famous man. If you're a computer scientist, you know this guy. Nope, I've had another student who became a professor someplace in New York, I forget where. Sidney Coleman was my unofficial student, and he became a very famous scientist. Got lots of awards, the Einstein Medal, the Fairman Medal, all these things. No, I don't, my advisor, I'm a Nobel laureate, my advisor was a Nobel laureate, and my advisor's advisor was a Nobel laureate, but I have no students in the past who have yet won the Nobel Prize, and I don't think I have one that will, unfortunately.
Thank you very much for being with us, Professor Glashow. Before we say goodbye to you, we want to give you another present so you will remember and come back for another lecture.
Science certificate is to express gratitude to Professor Sheldon Glashow of Boston University for participating as a speaker at the Nobel Laureate School Visits. Signed by the dean of students. would receive a beautiful document with Nobel Prize and a medal. And the one thing you didn't get, a big check.
Maybe medal next time, but I cannot promise this. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Our organization, Nobel Laureate School Visits, established our own prize for Nobel laureates participating. This beautiful book, and I would like to present it to our guest of honor today. These are about people who are like you. It's a curious boy who travels looking for happiness and studying and making great discoveries in his life. And hopefully we'll all follow the same route. And Professor Glashow is a well-clad friend, as you are.